Virginia, Maryland, who are with us today. I want to talk about two things tonight. First of all, I want to talk about the idea that Donald Trump or members of the Trump family or members of the Trump campaign colluded with representatives of the Russian state to affect the outcome of the 2016 election. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a fairy tale. This is a canard. This is a steaming plate of bullshit. So far, Democrats in the House and Senate Intelligence Committees have not produced one scintilla of evidence that demonstrates collusion with the Russians. Now, I give John Podesta some great credit because he's the one who invented this false narrative. Why? Well, he had to distract from the fact that he and his brother Tony and Bill and Hillary Clinton were making millions of dollars from the oligarchs around Putin. What better way to distract from the fact that there was a presidential candidate in bed with the Russians? There was a presidential candidate blackmailable by the Russians. There was a presidential candidate literally taking millions in speaking fees, contributions, and business deals. And that candidate was Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, this attack on Donald Trump Jr., who I have known since he was a child, is despicable because he has done nothing wrong, nothing illegal, or nothing improper. When you are in the midst of a presidential campaign and somebody credible comes to you and says they have evidence of your opponent's wrongdoing, and that evidence can be documented, then it would be malpractice not to meet with that person and hear what they have to say. In this particular case, there was no information that wasn't any use, and therefore this particular meeting had no result. This is what they have? This is Russian collusion? The next thing you're going to hear is the Trump family dog actually was in contact with a Russian wolfhound in a kennel center. In my view, Don Jr. was one of the most effective surrogates on behalf of his father in the Trump-Pence ticket. I salute him for the fact that he's been willing to call out fake news in his Twitter feed, in his Facebook feed, that he has stood shoulder to shoulder with us against the political elites who from the beginning said that Donald Trump could not be elected and then once nominated could not beat Hillary Clinton. Don Jr. never gave up. He never succumbed to the mainstream media theme that this election was over. They tried to write our candidate out of the race before Labor Day, which is unheard of. Then they tried to write him out of the race after Labor Day. The truth is, Donald Trump closed fast. And it is to the closer that the race goes. And in the final 3 weeks of this presidential campaign, surviving on 2 and 3 hours of sleep a night, Donald Trump was barnstorming Democratic strongholds in Michigan, in Wisconsin, in Pennsylvania, in Florida, in Ohio, and then starting all over again from the top. And where was Hillary Clinton?
In bed.
Sleeping. In her pajamas. Looking at swatches of material from the curtains in the Oval Office. One of the greatest closers in business or politics, Donald J. Trump. Now, I've known Donald Trump for 40 years. I cannot take credit for being the first one to suggest that he should run for president, because that was actually former President Richard Nixon. Trump and Nixon met in George Steinbrenner's box at Yankee Stadium. And the next day, the former president called me, and he was smitten. He said, well, I met your man, and I got to tell you, he says he's got the size. He didn't mean physical size, he meant the command presence, that quality that we sometimes call charisma or magnetism. It's something greater than that. It's an ability to fill the room. I've seen men like Richard Nixon or Governor John Connolly who had it. I've seen men like George Bush the first, who I think did not have it. It's a quality that's hard to describe. Nixon was impressed by Trump's intelligence, and they subsequently would meet in Houston, Texas, for a charitable event, which I helped arrange. And the former president and the future president spent hours together, with Trump just firing questions at the president. China, Russia, the Middle East, monetary policy, energy independence. Nixon told me he was exhausted by the end, but that Trump was like a sponge. He absorbed all this information, coming back with more and more questions. In 1988, when I first suggested a Trump candidacy, it was after Nixon had written Donald Trump a letter saying, if you get into politics, you will go all the way. And it was prophetic. Now, I wanted Donald Trump to run in 1988. I wanted him to run in 2000. I wanted him to run in 2012. But in retrospect, I would have to admit today, the time was probably not right in any of those years. 2016 was the perfect storm. 2016 was the point we reached where the American people had a disgust level, a disillusionment with government, with both parties, with career politicians, with political institutions, but most importantly, for the first time in my lifetime, they also had a deep distrust of big media. They had a deep distrust of corporately owned mainstream media. The American people finally figured out that big media is in bed with the establishment to further the narrative of the elites. And that skepticism and the technological advance of the majority of American voters now getting their political information on their handheld device, whether it's a cell phone or an iPad or a PC. For the first time, the monopoly of the big three networks and the two cable networks on the dissemination of political information has been broken. And that gave rise to a vibrant, robust alternative media. And that alternative media gave rise to the Trump presidency. I discussed this in some length in my book, The Making of the President 2016, but I raise it tonight because, in my view, the greatest single threat we face in terms of continuing this revolution is the effort by the tech left, Yahoo, Google, Amazon, Facebook, and Twitter, to put the toothpaste back in the tube. Utilizing dozens of computer tricks and manipulation of the algorithms, deciding to openly brand any opinion they disagree with as fake news, they seek to strangle our right to free expression. They seek to end the marketplace of ideas that the internet has become. And this is a dangerous slope. In fact, it's worse than that, because in 2016, around Christmas, President Barack Obama signed a defense appropriations bill that had in it essentially the setup and funding of a board of truth, of a national censorship board, and provided money to go out and hire operations like Snopes, run by a hooker, a drug addict, what the third guy does, that is somehow held up to us as an arbiter of what's right and what's wrong. They'll decide what's fake news? No, I don't think so. I believe that these activities violate the antitrust laws of the United States. I would urge the President to have the Attorney General for Antitrust, if we ever get around to appointing one, look aggressively at these anti-competitive activities by the internet giants. They would seek to stifle this revolution. they now realize that opening the door to a free, unfettered internet has given us the opportunity to go outside the box, to go outside the traditional political model, and to cast off the monopoly that mainstream media has had on political information, and the elected candidate who is an outsider, Donald Trump, someone who's never served in government before, somebody who has no connections to the bad decisions of the last 30 years, someone who's not responsible for where the country is today. And that scares the daylights out of the political establishment. And yes, the two-party duopoly, there are certainly members of our party who are still very firmly in the never Trump camp. That's what this entire Russian question is about. It is resentment over Donald Trump's successful election and the shock that it brought to the left, and it is a consistent effort to undermine the credibility, to undermine the legitimacy of the Trump presidency. Meanwhile, the FISA court, the super secret FISA court, ruled just days before Donald Trump became president that the Obama administration has been involved in the wholesale surveillance of tens of thousands and perhaps more Americans in violation of the U.S. Constitution. Folks, this makes Watergate look like a milk-fed puppy. This is a crime. Why? Attorney General Sessions has not convened a grand jury and called for Mr. Clapper and Mr. Brennan and Ms. Rice, and yes, Barack Obama himself, because we need to know, what did the president know and when did he know it? These are indictable criminal offenses. And unlike the canard of Russian collusion, which is a mindless repetition of the 17 intelligence agencies are convinced that there was Russian interference. They say it over and over again, but they produce no evidence. In this case, it is the U.S. FISA court that has ruled and put forward the assertion that there has been widespread, illegal, unconstitutional surveillance of Americans. This is a crime that must be prosecuted. If they want to talk about Russia, this is going nowhere. We should be talking about their wholesale spying on Americans and the violation of our civil liberties. It is always better to be on offense than defense. So I would have to say, Barack Obama, Mr. Clapper, Mr. Brennan, Ms. Rice, lock them up. One of the great lessons of Watergate, we were told, is that no person is above the law. What then of Bill and Hillary Clinton and their greedy, nasty, foul-mouthed, abusive little daughter? The Clinton Foundation is not a charity, it's a slush fund for grifters. And it was a vehicle for the facilitation of multi-million-dollar bribes. If the Clinton Foundation were on the right and had the filing discrepancies and the other demonstrably illegal activities, they would have had their tax status lifted by the IRS long ago. But the IRS was too busy harassing conservative and free enterprise-oriented nonprofits to even take a look at what the Clinton Foundation was doing. Again, I think it is Jeff Sessions' responsibility to determine whether crimes have been committed within the context of the Clinton Foundation. I don't think that's very complicated. Their filings alone betray numerous illegal activities. And again, We do not win against the Obamas or the Clintons on defense. And if the Russian canard is the best they have, I would say that we have much, much stronger issues of responsibility on the left. Now, I'm going to take your questions. How many of you have seen the Netflix film Get Me Right? The rest of you need to get busy. Considering that this movie was made by three left-wing, beatnik, pinko, New York City maggots. This movie was 5 years in the making. When these three guys, by the way, they're actually very communists, but came to me and said, we want to make this documentary on you, and all we need is your cooperation. And I said, well, what's your budget? How much do you think this documentary will cost? And they said, well, we think it will cost $125,000. I said, okay. How much of that do you have today? They said, none. So what do you have? They said, well, we have this one camera. Looked pretty beat up, actually. But we're convinced if you sign this letter saying you're going to cooperate, we can raise the $125,000. So, taking a flyer, I signed the agreement. And then over 5 years, they would go out and raise, say, $25,000. We'd do some intense filming. And then they would disappear for 6 months, sometimes 8 months, and I would hear nothing. And suddenly they would pop up again with another chunk of funding. And after 5 years, and the election of Donald Trump, and with the president-elect giving them a very gracious series of interviews for the film, they sold their documentary to Netflix for $1.8 million. A big stone gets nothing. And they had a $2 million promotional budget, which was not so bad. It means that I can't go through any airport in America without somebody wanting to punch me out. The film is worth watching. If for no other reason, it shows you that if you're persistent about an idea and you stick to promotion of that idea, no matter how long it takes you, you can succeed. People obviously ask me a lot about whether I really have a tattoo of Richard Nixon on my back. The answer is yes. I'm the only person you know with a dick on the front and the back. And I say this, it's not a political statement in any way, although it does really piss liberals off. It's a daily reminder for me that in life, when things don't go your way, when you are defeated, when something you're really counting on doesn't come through, or something you compete to win doesn't go your way, when you're dejected, when you're depressed, when you're ready to give up, well, that's the time you got to dust yourself off, get off the mat, and get back in the game. The story of Nixon is a story of persistence. It's a story of resilience. It's a story of success. This man not only lost the presidency by a sliver. If you read my book, Nixon's Secrets, there's a lot of documentation about why that election was stolen in both Texas and Illinois. But he then went on, in order to keep his career alive and potentially have another shot at the presidency, ran for governor of California, facing a second ignominious defeat. He was written off, dead, finished, through, a national embarrassment. He was a joke. Yet, the events of 1968 laid the groundwork for the greatest political comeback in American history. And then, undone by Watergate, and there's a lot more to Watergate than what you've been told. The Woodward-Bernstein Washington Post version leaves out a lot of inconvenient facts. again, comes back in the role of elder statesman, advising President Clinton on how to handle the Russians, the Chinese, writing 10 bestsellers on foreign policy, and having 4 living American presidents pay tribute to him at the time of his death. Persistence, resilience, that's what's important. And I salute you as young Republicans, particularly in the capital region, because I know it is not politically correct. I know it is not popular among many of your peers. I know because I went to George Washington University. I remember going down to the mailroom on Saturdays. I would be getting National Review, and everybody else would be picking up their copy of Ramparts magazine. It was a time of the Vietnam War. It was a time in which anyone who was young and a conservative or a Republican had to feel like they were a true minority. So I salute you for sticking to your guns. I salute you for seeing the strength and the correctness of our party and our arguments and our vision of America. And now we have a president who is a man of enormous courage, a man of real persistence when he gets something in his mind. And ladies and gentlemen, the thing he has in his mind is making America great again. This is not just a slogan. Donald Trump is giving up one of the greatest lives you could possibly have to come to Washington and struggle with the entrenched elite. This is a man who loves playing golf, who loves playing with his grandchildren, who has one of the greatest houses in Florida, who has a phenomenal apartment in Manhattan with an extraordinary view of the skyline. Think about how great it would be to get up in the morning, eat your breakfast, get on the elevator, push the button, and in one floor, you're at your office. Pretty great. This is someone who has controlled his own schedule for his entire life. Someone who, despite the fact that he would spend every weekend in Palm Beach in the winter, would always fly back Sunday night, not Monday morning. Why? Because he had to be at his desk Monday morning. Here's a billionaire telling you his work ethic. He had to be at his desk Monday morning, and he was there until Friday at 5, because that was, in his view, his job, building one of the greatest real estate empires in American business history. What he brought to the campaign for president, in my view, was not only his ability as a businessman, but the American people's knowledge of him. 15 seasons of The Apprentice, network television. Think about it. He's in the high back chair. Every hair is in place, perfectly lit, the blue suit, the red tie, the white shirt. Acting presidential, acting like an executive, making decisions. That enhanced the prospects for his candidacy, because no one began this year not knowing who Donald Trump was. And we had a lot of other good men and women pursuing this nomination. I'm a big fan of Marco Rubio. I like Marco Rubio. He's my senator. I'm proud to say I voted for him. I'm glad he decided to run again. But because we're interested in politics, we know who that is. The American people didn't know half of our candidates, but they did know one. And therefore, he confounded the experts based, I think, on 3 things. A level of disillusionment and anger by the voters that was more profound and deeper than anything I had seen in 40 years of studying polling. The rise of alternative media, which we discussed previously. The fact that he was a known commodity out of the box. And the fact that the pollsters, by and large, insisted on using an outdated model in terms of determining who was going to turn out and vote. The Democrats assumed the same number of African Americans would turn out and vote for Hillary Clinton that voted for Barack Obama. That was never a realistic assumption. And that is why, by and large, most of the polls showed that she was comfortably ahead. They had a bad sample, as it were. In any event, I'm happy to take your questions on any subject whatsoever.